Welcome to USC Trojans Primetime Live here at the Voice of College Football, the USC channel. I'm Matt Zemek. He's Ethan Inman. Back at you for another week. And once again, a big news story within about 24, 30 hours of our show. So that's naturally what we're going to lead with. USC finds Benny Wiley's replacement at strength coach, Tummaine Carroll from Kansas State. So we're going to chop this up a little bit. Ethan, your initial reaction to the hire of Tummaine Carroll from Kansas State?
I'm excited, Matt. I mean, I think he did a lot with that program over there. When I was looking at his numbers, I mean, Kansas State had a 36-17 record in the past 4 years, including 3 bowl victories and the 2022 Big Ten championship over number 3 TCU, which, if by my count, USC only had 2 bowl victories. He also won 9 or more games in the last 3 seasons. And he was one of only 4. He was part of one of only 5 Power 5 teams to win that total and win a conference championship in that span. And yeah, by my count, USC only had 1 9 or more win season and no conference titles. So even that would have been an improvement on our tenure. And obviously, you don't have quite as many resources out there in Manhattan, Kansas, as you do in Los Angeles, California. So I think that's exciting. I think that he's done a lot of good stuff with that program over there. And he's also got a lot of experience. I mean, he's been around. He was at Missouri, Kansas City, South Carolina State, Oklahoma State, SMU, Arkansas, South Florida, and then he ended up at K-State for the 4 years. So he's got a lot of experience. He's, had some recent success. And I think that he's a guy that we can be excited about for sure. It's not a super crazy splashy hire. We're not getting somebody from a massive program, but it feels like a really solid hire and a guy that, especially with a program like this, with a ton of resources that could really flourish. So I'm excited. Yeah.
I am too. I think the main observation I'd like to make and emphasize is that Kansas State has been a punch you in the mouth type program. There are certain programs, like we can all identify them. Some are finesse offenses. They beat you with speed. They beat you with, trying to score 40, 45 points per game. There are other programs, they just try to run you over. They try to beat you up. They like the back alley street fight. Kansas State is one of those programs. Kansas State's not a fancy schmancy program. It's not about the scheme. It's not about the innovative razzle dazzle. They just want to play slobber knocker football, and they've done it really well, right? They won the Big 12, as you alluded to, very recently. They've punched above their weight a lot, and so that to me tells me this is a really good hire. The other thing, folks, USC and UCLA fans, when Chip Kelly and Clay Helton were both coaching against each other, each fan base would say about the other, USC fans would say, Chip Kelly is a great coach. UCLA needs to retain him. Go all in with Chip. And UCLA fans, of course, Clay Helton's just the best coach ever. Look how positive he is. Look at players love him. You've got to retain Clay Helton, coming from Westwood, of course. So when the enemy's saying great things about your coach, your operation, something's wrong. And of course, the flip side, when someone else is saying, darn, that's a really big loss for us. That really stings. Wow, are we going to be as good? Kansas State beat writers, Kansas State reporters. I don't know if you follow any of them, but there's a guy named Kellis Robinette, longtime Kansas State beat writer. He said significant loss for Kansas State to lose Tummaine Carroll. Derek Young, runs another Kansas State website. He wrote, wow, this is a high impact loss. Now, they do think that their replacement, a guy named Ray Thomas, they think he can do the job. He got promoted internally as the replacement. So, obviously, they had their they were ready with a fill-in for Tummaine Carroll. But still, when the affected school says, this is a significant loss, the people who cover that school say this is a significant loss. To me, that's also a central reason to be very optimistic about this hire. Ethan, there was another part of this story, not the Tummaine Carroll story, but USC trying to hire a strength coach. So obviously the Trojans got their guy, but this was not the number one candidate. Over the weekend, reports surfaced that USC was making a run at Derek Owings, and he is the strength coach for Curt Cignetti at Indiana. So the rumors flew, Indiana locking down Derek Owings. To me, Ethan, while we definitely celebrate the hire of Tummaine Carroll, I think it's a celebration-worthy hire. It's just notable that, Indiana's meteoric rise as a program under Cignetti, that tells me that if USC had gotten Derek Owings, that would have been a home run. So, like, the point to emphasize here, USC football, like, the right decisions are being made. Like, the Rolodex, in terms of having your plan A, your plan B, like, this search for a new strength coach, textbook, like, could not have gone any better. I mean, maybe you get Derek Owings, it could have gone better than that, but they didn't get their 1A, they got their 1B. It's so refreshing to see a smart football ops right now at USC. Like, they handled this as well as you reasonably could have.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think that, Derek Owings is, like you said, would have been the 1A, but you can't really blame him for not leaving. I mean, Curt Cignetti has Indiana in a great place. He is also a very good PR guy, very good, at facing the camera. So I assume he's like that internally as well. I assume that he inspires a lot of belief in his staffers and a lot of, belief in what they can go out and accomplish the next year, especially having just gone to a college football playoff. So, you can't really blame him for not leaving and going and getting a guy who's in a situation where he's had success, but there's a clear difference between the kind of resources and trajectory that you have at Kansas State, which is still positive. They've been a great program, but they're not a program that historically has consistent national title aspirations, whereas USC is one that, over the years has been able to consistently get back to that and, has the great recruiting class coming in 2026 that it seems like there's no strength coach in the country that wouldn't want to handle those guys. So I think that, yeah, they pivoted in the right direction after losing out on the number one guy. And they had that backup plan. Like you said, you can't really expect to get a guy like, Derek Owings at Indiana. So you have to have a backup plan, and they executed that really well.
All right, now back to Tummaine Carroll, Ethan. We did discuss last week the timing of releasing Benny Wiley, and on a certain level it was odd, but on another level it made sense. Like, Chad Bowden's number one priority was recruiting, and he had to get that house in order, and he certainly has. And then you tend to some personnel matters in the offseason. And one thing we alluded to last week here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football is that, with the 12-team playoff and the playoff teams, the championship teams playing deep into January and more games being asked of college football teams if they're going to pursue the national championship, spring football, spring practice has just been devalued. That's just the way it is. You add on the layer of, some programs, including Lincoln Riley's USC, no longer having a spring game on TV as an exposure magnet. We are seeing that spring football shrink in terms of the overall stakes, the overall significance. So the idea that you would keep a strength coach through spring seems absolutely ridiculous in like a 2018, 2019 world, but in 2025, not nearly so much. But now we turn to Tummaine Carroll stepping in May, not a ton of time to kind of impose his vision, his blueprint on the strength program at USC for the 2025 season. It's really about building a foundation that will hopefully then really pay off in 2026 and 2027. So even calibrate this. What do you think is kind of a reasonable expectation, or just maybe just things that you're going to be interested in seeing from Tummaine Carroll and from USC football as we get into summer preseason camp and the early weeks of the 2025 regular season? What are you looking for?
I think The timing is interesting. We talked about that last week, but I also think that they got on this hire really quickly. I mean, it was just last week, basically like 24 hours before we got on the show, that Benny Wiley was fired, and now we hear again on another show talking about his replacement. So and that is also despite, like you said, their number one option not being available. So they were very quick and very deliberate about this hire, which gives him, it's not the super most ideal situation. Like you said, he doesn't have the most time, but he still has a very significant amount of time. And the most time that they could possibly give him to try to have his impact on this program. So I think that what I'll be looking for in terms of his impact in 2025 specifically is how he works with the offensive and defensive line, because like we've talked about, that was one of the biggest issues last year, the size on the offensive and defensive line. And this year they have brought in a lot of guys who have a lot of natural size. We talked about Jakeem Stewart and guys like that. And, and there's a couple of offensive line transfers, and, the defensive line is really more of the focus here though. And I think that will be the most interesting thing to me, because I think that those guys, have a decent bit of eligibility left, and they're guys who have a lot of size, but not a lot of experience, which is kind of what I said last week. So I think that those are the guys that I'd want him to primarily focus on, because if those guys can turn into, absolute monsters, then when, some more guys in 2026 that come in that have all that size and all that talent, they can kind of fill in around them based on that kind of foundation that he set this year. So I think those are the position groups specifically that I would hope that get a lot of focus and a lot of attention. And that's the group that I will kind of be looking at a good bit to kind of evaluate how he's doing this year for sure.
One layer to add to this, Ethan, we always try to relate what's happening to the staff, what's happening to football ops, and how it relates to how Lincoln Riley, the guy under fire, the guy at the center of it all, the guy responsible for trying to turn this ship around, how he's going to, adjust on the field in relationship to the different infrastructure and staff he has around him. And one of the signature moments, not in a good way, but like one of the defining moments, that's the better word, one of the defining moments of the USC 2024 season, and why it failed to reach the standards that it could have and frankly should have. I'm always going to look back at that 4th and 1 late against Maryland. You're USC, they're Maryland, 4th and 1 late in the game. You get 1 yard against Maryland, you win, and you don't go for it. You try to kick a field goal. You go for the finesse angle. And of course, I get it. Field goal means a 2-possession game. The math was there. I get it. But again, you're USC, they're Maryland. You should be able to get a yard. And Lincoln Riley clearly did not trust his offensive line to the extent that he could have last season. And I have to think, when you change strength coaches, that's a message to the head coach, because Lincoln Riley didn't make this move, right? We know this was Chad Bowden and the larger administrative structure. Benny Wiley being one of Lincoln Riley's guys, we know this. Because these changes are being made, you have to think, Ethan, that there are discussions behind the scene. When we get into that foxhole, 4th and 1 late in the game, we ain't kicking no stinking field goal. I mean, unless it's a 6-point game and the field goal is a 19-yard chip shot, like it's an extra point, it's easy peasy, you're going to get that 9-point lead. But if there's any doubt, if it's a 33, 38-yard field goal, no, we are getting that yard behind our offensive line. It's USC, it's student body right. We are playing physical football now that we've invested in a new strength coach. So you'd have to think that for all the USC fans who say, run the damn ball, this is a good development. This is moving the program in that direction, right?
Well, absolutely. And on that 4th and 1 too, I mean, having more confidence in the kicking game than the offensive line when our kicking game was what it was last year is kind of telling, because it's not like Michael Lance was one of the best kickers in the country. I mean, I rooted for him. I'm very glad that he's getting an opportunity in LA with the Chargers. I hope the best for him, but he was very shaky overall, and it was very, very frustrating. So I think that, yeah, that having more confidence in him than the offensive lineman is not an ideal situation. So like I said, I'm right there with you. I hope that's a focus. And when that same situation comes up, and, just general red zone situations, which is something that I've talked about pretty repeatedly on the podcast in my first few weeks, is, a lot of questionable decision-making in the red zone last year, lots of, throwing the ball 3 times and then trying to kick a field goal, or, that kind of thing. More running the ball, even against those sets where there's a lot of big defensive linemen in the game, and other teams are throwing out extra linemen because it's a short yardage situation or it's close to the end zone. Like, yeah, they definitely want to see more running the ball, and see more emphasis on trusting the offensive line. And, to have that, we need to have an offensive line that we can trust. So hope it happens for sure.
All right, so new strength coach at USC, and by all appearances, Tummaine Carroll seems to be the real meal deal. Definitely more reason for USC football fans to be excited and optimistic about the direction of the program. Before we get into recruiting, which is another obvious reason for optimism, Ethan, just like, I think we need to keep talking about this in the off season, that like all the right moves are being made. Like all the intelligent decisions are being made. It's just, it's not surprising that USC football is being run the right way. What's surprising is just, it feels like a switch was flipped. It's just like, boom, like Chad Bowden comes, and like the instantaneous nature of the program morphing into an adult program. Like, this is a big boy program. This is how it's done. I just continue to marvel, Ethan, at how quickly all of this happened. I mean, there's a part of my brain that just can't wrap myself around it. Like, okay, we hired the right general manager, but for it to flow so smoothly, and for just this amazing domino effect to immediately happen, and not just for the immediate domino effect, but how continuous it has been. Just one ripple after another. It is staggering to me, Ethan.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think there was maybe a tiny bit of warm up to this with the switch from Alex Grinch to Danton Lynn, maybe, because I mean, Alex Grinch was obviously one of Lincoln Riley's guys. He stuck with him too long. Maybe there's a little bit of Lincoln Riley realizing, like, hey, if I get guys that maybe aren't necessarily my guys, but are other smart guys in the room, then maybe that, is worth doing. And then, you get Chad Bowden in, and then Chad Bowden has obviously been the fuel behind a lot of this fire that you're talking about, of things just kind of taking off. But yeah, no, it's resulted in a lot of good, and a lot of very positive change. And here we are with another Coach Carroll at USC. So not in the exact same position that the Coach Carroll once was, and not with the resume, but it's still kind of a fun little connection that we've got going on here.
Well, hopefully this will become Carroll 2.0 now that Chad Bowden's in, and the program is beginning to display the traits of what we saw under Pete Carroll. All right, let's now get into recruiting, which is part of the fruit of Chad Bowden's just amazing domino effect of excellence and great decision-making and proper operational procedure at USC, doing things the right way, doing things that get results across the board. Just the recruits are flying off the shelves. And I think one question a lot of people are wondering about is, USC's not going to retain all of these guys, right? Like, it's like there's the size of the class is so big, there are bound to be some playing time issues, conflicts, maybe, the NIL pie being so divided that, someone's not going to be happy with his or her cut. How much of a concern is that? What is your general overview of that?
I'm not as concerned about it right now. I think that a lot of these guys are making those decisions with the kind of awareness in mind of what they're committing to. Like, between the time that you and I talked last week and this week, I think there's been 4 new commitments that I've seen. And, those are like the 23rd through 27th commitments in the 2026 class. So it's not like any of those players made that commitment without the knowledge that there were 23 players that committed before them. Like, I think that I would expect a lot of these players to be going in with the understanding that, there's going to be a lot of talent here. And there's going to be a lot of, stiff competition for playing time, especially at a lot of the positions that, we're getting guys committing from. Because I think we got in the past week, it's been 2 wide receivers and then an offensive tackle and then a corner. So, I mean, these are positions that USC is recruited in heavily and is going to have a lot of talent in when they come in. So I wouldn't think that any of them are going to be delusional about that. Obviously, it's a different era than it was 10, 15 years ago when guys were a little bit more willing to wait to play and, wait to develop and try to win national championships and, pursuing the most talented team rather than the team where they have, the chance to play so that they can make all of that NIL money. But I think that part of that is culture too. And I think that if USC can instill the culture that, like, hey, it's going to take a little bit of selflessness, but we're committed to winning national titles. And we also we happen to have the best developmental staff. So if you stick around, you buy into winning national titles, you're okay with sitting for a year, maybe 2 and learning, that you will also become the best player that you can possibly be. I think I saw a tweet from Jacoby Lane recently where he was saying, he was commenting on NIL and saying something like, don't get it confused. Like, college football is still about, development and going to the NFL, and, players who pursue NIL are going to be, pursue solely NIL are going to put themselves in a harmful situation. So, Jacoby's a guy who see that, and he's a guy who I've seen projected to go in the first round next year, potentially, if he, can kind of take that next step in his career this year. So I think, it's not guys like that. It's not like guys like that don't exist anymore. There are still guys like that out there. And there are guys like that in the USC program. So I think that if they can keep instilling that, like I said, I think a lot of these new recruits are not, blind to the amount of talent that's already in the room. And there's obviously a reason that they're making this commitment, despite all of that talent and despite all of that stiff competition that they're going to have with their peers and people in front of them that are really talented at those positions. So I would assume that, as long as the staff is able to keep reminding them of those reasons that they committed, back in the spring of 2025, that they can retain a lot of those players. They're going 27 for 27, assuming that the number lands around 27 would be probably impossible. Like, you're probably going to lose 1 or 2 guys, here and there. But I think that retaining the majority of the class, and especially retaining some of the most talented guys, is definitely something that we should be relatively confident in seeing, for sure.
Good comment here from Leon S. Some things are Chad, referring to Chad Bowden. Some things are Lincoln Riley. Some are Jen Cohen. It takes a village. Would fundamentally agree with that. Then we also have the point from Real Talk College Football that local focus, referring to recruiting, is a power flex, and we are flexing. So to take Leon's point, it's a little bit Chad, it's a little bit Riley, it's a little bit Cohen. But then, this point about local focus, this was the thing that Lincoln Riley was not nailing down. Now, so this is not to say that Lincoln Riley doesn't deserve any credit for what's going on. I mean, he's still a guy who's won a bunch of conference championships, made a bunch of college football playoffs. So he still has the resume, still has credentials. He's not a nobody. He's had 2 really bad seasons, but he still has a significant bed of achievements to bring forth to recruits. So there's certainly still something there. So there's still certainly some value attached to Lincoln Riley in big time recruiting. But this point, local focus, this was not Lincoln Riley's strong point. This is a Chad Bowden thing. This is a Jen Cohen thing. Like, Jen Cohen bringing aboard Chad Bowden, that was the Kickstarter. But Ethan, tackle this overall point about how you sense the mixture of the different prime players in this football ops restoration and revival at USC, in terms of dividing the pie among Bowden, Riley, Cohen, any particular insights in terms of how you see these three people working together, and perhaps which moves seem more collaborative and which seem more kind of one guy really taking charge? How do you sense the power dynamics and how this is all working behind the scenes at USC?
Well, based on what I've heard, kind of this year and since Chad has come in, I would assume that a lot of the more recent developments in terms of putting the fence around California and getting those local recruits is mainly a Chad thing. But I don't think that it's a bad thing to admit that. I think that it shouldn't diminish our confidence in Lincoln Riley just because Chad is going out and doing his thing, and it's like, oh, why couldn't Lincoln have done this and whatever. I think that a big lesson that Lincoln Riley needed to learn was to kind of rescind some of his duties and let other people take charge of this stuff, because obviously Lincoln Riley's strong suit is going out and running the offense and developing quarterbacks and developing an offensive scheme. So now he gets to focus a lot more on that. He's got a great guy on the defensive side of the ball, so he doesn't have to worry about defense anymore in Danton Lynn. He's got Jen Cohen, who's done a great job in administration, and now he's got Chad Bowden, who's going out and doing a lot of great stuff in recruiting. So I think that it's a good thing. And I don't, like I said, I don't think that we should reluctantly admit that Chad has been responsible for a lot of that stuff. And I think, but I don't think that, kind of like you said, I don't think that it's no credit to Lincoln Riley. I think that he is always going to have a hand in recruiting, and he's the head coach of this football team. And so, at the end of the day, he's kind of the guy who has to be in charge of leading these players and leading this team and deciding the direction of the team on the football field on Saturday. So it's not like, any of this goes on without his sign off. So I think, I think that all of them, it is important for all of them to be on the same page consistently. And I think that all of them likely, have a lot of conversations about these things, even if, they're not all directly involved in all of these situations. But I think that it is Chad in terms of the recruiting side of things a lot, but I don't think that that's a bad thing, because I think that means that at the same time recruiting is getting better, and we'll also likely see a better offense on the field next year. So.
Okay, now this next question is speculative. It's one of the questions that we will never, ever get a definitive answer, because this was not the path USC traveled. But we got to have some fun with this. We got to just play what if here, Ethan. And the what if question is, what if USC, instead of going 7-5, went 9-3? Not the playoff, but came really close and maybe was near the cut line. All right. What if USC goes 9-3? Do you think Chad Bowden gets hired? Do you think this significant and necessary makeover occurs? In other words, was it necessary? People might say it's never necessary to go 7-5 at USC. But you could say it was necessary for Lincoln Riley to take this big downward fall, get humiliated, get his face rubbed in the dirt, and that stripped away a certain degree of leverage, power in the room, and Jen Cohen was empowered, conversely, to say, Lincoln, you're going to do this my way. You're going to submit. You're going to have to, not be in control of as many things. And maybe Jen Cohen said, hey, I will push harder to get you out the door if you don't start, following some marching orders here at Troy. If USC was 9-3, do you think the same course of events would have unfolded, or was it necessary for USC to go 7-5 for Lincoln Riley to be humbled like this? I mean, in a good way with good results, but nevertheless for the power dynamic in the back room to change at USC the way it has.
It's a good question, Matt. Like you said, we'll never really know the answer, but I think this is a move that very likely would have happened regardless. I think that with the year that Notre Dame had, and just the changing landscape of college football in general, and the need for somebody to be in the room that focuses on NIL and focuses on almost treating recruiting like free agency, you need more smart guys in the room like that, and hires like that were happening anyway. And I think that something that I've brought up before is when you really look into kind of the nitty gritty of how the season went, a lot of these games, they were a play or two away from winning anyway. So, them squeaking out the Maryland and Washington games, I think, doesn't really move the needle for me, and probably shouldn't have moved the needle for Jen Cohen either, especially if I said, it was one or two plays went differently. They were able to not turn the ball over in the end and squeak it out, or, finish the drive and score the touchdown, whatever it was. I think that this would have likely happened regardless, just due to the changing landscape of college football, and again, just due to the year that Notre Dame went out and had. I think that it's whenever your rival especially has someone who is able to kind of take the program to the next level and kind of transform them into something greater. And Notre Dame is a program that is likely now to have sustained success just due to the financial model of the current 12-team playoff. So, and them, benefiting that, especially being an independent. I think that's an offensive move that would have tried to have been made regardless. And on the Lincoln Riley humility point, I do think that it is a good thing. I have hope that it is going to be a good thing in the long run that Lincoln Riley struggled for a couple of years, because I think that he may not have realized coming in, especially with how good his first year went, just kind of the different level of challenge that this program was going to be compared to stepping into a situation in Oklahoma that was already good. I mean, he inherited a 4-8 team with, outsized expectations that had been struggling for quite a long while, honestly, since Pete Carroll left almost 2 decades ago. So, and then he kind of stepped into the situation where he got some really established offensive players to transfer in. The schedule in 2022 wasn't particularly strong beyond Utah, and just kind of everything fell into place. He had a Heisman Trophy quarterback that he'd recruited to play at Oklahoma already that just kind of happened to follow him. And then everything just kind of fell into place and he had immediate success. But that didn't feel like very sustainable. And so I wasn't entirely surprised when the next couple of seasons were not as great. So I think that, fully realizing, okay, being the Trojan coach is a different kind of challenge. This is a program that needs overhaul from the top down and from the bottom up. And it needs patience. It needs me admitting, I stepped into a situation where I was able to already get established in the Oklahoma program. It was in a great spot. And, I had all the resources in the world and a relationship with local people in Oklahoma, just everything going for me. And this, I uprooted, and I'm in a situation now that's completely different, and I'm having to build it from the ground up. I think that is ultimately going to be a lesson that is positive. And I think that we're seeing that in a lot of these, hey, letting go of the smartest guy in the room syndrome, like you've called it before on the podcast, hiring some of these other smart people to get into the room. And I think it'll be good for the success immediately, but also, and more importantly, the sustained success of this program going forward.
Real talk. Brian makes the point. I will buy in on Lincoln Riley humility when he hires help on his side of the ball. And Brian, I think the one really important detail attached to your very good point is, this was a Riley move. The promotion of Zach Hansen from tight end coach up to offensive line coach. That was a Riley move. Can't say that Chad Bowden had his fingerprints on that one. That was Riley. And so that was kind of a one last instance of Riley kind of making his own choice. And so we need to see Zach Hansen deliver the goods. And if not, then Lincoln Riley needs to have the humility to say, hey, let's get a big hitter outside the family. So really good point there from Brian. All right, Ethan, one last thing to chop up with recruiting, and that is that Oregon We don't talk about Dan Lanning and Oregon recruiting much anymore around here, which is great, right? Because USC is doing its job, and USC is looking down on Oregon for the 2026 class. Feels so good to not have to worry about Oregon too much anymore. And Oregon just lost a very high-profile recruiting battle with Georgia for a top quarterback. And I'm not saying like the Oregon recruiting is crumbling or anything like that. Okay, I'm not. But obviously, USC has caught up to Oregon in 2026, and it brings up the point: if Dan Lanning and Oregon don't win the national championship, or at least get to the national championship game this upcoming season or next year, are they ever going to do it? Because then you'll have USC with these loaded classes. And usually when USC has the dudes, USC is better than Oregon. So just in terms of recruiting and where things stand and how it flows onto the field on fall Saturdays, how much increased pressure, if any? Maybe it's just Oregon's going to be great with Lanning no matter what. Maybe that's your answer. But it is an interesting question. I know there's a little bit of saliva dripping out of the mouths of some USC fans like, oh, Oregon downfall. I can taste it. I can taste it. What is your view of Oregon in this next 2-year window under Dan Lanning? Just how important is it for the Ducks?
Well, I think Oregon fans are certainly feeling the pressure because all I see from Oregon fans on social media these days is, total breakdown, honestly, from a lot of them on Twitter and other sites. But I think Dan Lanning has done a lot for the program. I mean, this last year, the result in the college football playoff is not, is definitely not what you want to see if you're Oregon. But, aside from that, one of the best years in program history. So I think if this year is a step back, it's not like an immediate, like, super short memory. We'll forget about what happened in 2024. Dan Lanning is out, especially with USC being as good as they are. I think that they'll have a little bit more patience than that with him, especially because they're not a program that has, consistently historic expectations of winning national titles. I don't need to remind everyone that, the number of national titles looks the same as the first letter in the program's name, which is 0. USC fans love to remind Oregon fans about that. So I think that they'll be a little bit more patient with him. I think, it's not like USC was, had one bad year of Lincoln Riley, saw, the good that Dan Lanning was doing in Oregon and, had the reverse situation where they're just like, all right, no tolerance for that, immediately fired. But, Phil Knight is getting older and, he's behind a lot of the financial rise of Oregon and, their in turn, the recruiting, especially in the era of NIL. So he's maybe feeling slightly more impatient than in the past because I'm sure he wants to see a national championship before, before the end of his life. So he'll probably be, putting a little bit of pressure on the administration in that regard. But I do think that 2024 is a year that you can't just quickly forget. So I wouldn't say, and I wouldn't, I think it'd have to be an absolutely disastrous, like losing record type of 2025 for him to be on the hot seat in 2026. And then I think that, mediocrity and, maybe slightly more wins than losses is only going to land him on the hot seat at like the earliest 2027, if I had to speculate on it.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if Oregon can capitalize on this 2025 season in which, the cavalry's coming at USC, but it's not fully here yet. Next year's when, the full Monty's at USC. This might be the year that Oregon has to take advantage because at Troy, as Brian said in the chat, we're marching. We're marching at Troy. Oregon, the clock is ticking for Oregon to get it done right now. Okay, we're going to have more for you here at the Voice of College Football. We'll see if this 1-minute commercial from our sponsors works this week. It didn't last week. Let's see if it works this week.
You can make a difference here at the Voice of College Football. Use the Amazon link. Financially contribute to the Voice of College Football without spending a penny. Same shopping experience. It's easy. Go to any video on any channel, go to the description section and grab the link right next to the capital letters that say Amazon. Use that link and Amazon will instantaneously convert to your account, settings, history, everything intact, just like whatever link you use right now. No difference. Pay no attention to the product that you see right there. Just go search what you want. Don't forget the Amazon link. Thank you for your support. Sincerely, the voice of college football.
Okay, the commercial worked. So we wanted to do that as part of our attempt to generate revenue here. And speaking of generating revenue, we have USC YouTube memberships available, different tiers. If you want to support our USC channel, remember we also have a Tuesday night show here at the Voice of College Football. If you want to support the USC channel, plenty of YouTube memberships available. And of course, we had a few months without shows, but now, as you can plainly see, we're back giving you regular weekly content. So whatever you can do to support the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. All right, so on the other side of that little commercial from Mark Rogers, the other really big news of the week, news worth talking about, Notre Dame and Clemson. You probably saw, heard, read that Notre Dame and Clemson have a 12-year scheduling agreement head-to-head. They're going to play 12 straight years, 2027 through 2038. And, one person I have collaborated with in the past over at Notre Dame, he used to work at Fighting Irish Wire. He now works at Notre Dame's Sports Illustrated site. His name's Nick Shepkowski, very smart guy, knows so much about Notre Dame. And he wrote an article earlier this week after the ND Clemson deal hit the headlines. He said, if you go into the past, Notre Dame has wound down some longstanding or high-profile series, regular season series. When it made a move to do something new, that was a sign. Nick explained that it was winding down another rivalry. So there was a Notre Dame Penn State series in the early 1990s. Notre Dame made some changes that wound down around a decade ago. Remember, Notre Dame and Michigan, they had a good thing going. They had that annual series, played it for several decades. Notre Dame made some other scheduling moves and wound that one down. So Ethan Inman, are we about to see the end of the Notre Dame USC series because of this 12-year scheduling agreement that Notre Dame has with Clemson? Obviously it's part of the ACC agreement, but nevertheless, a high-profile thing for that many years consecutively, that certainly offers reason to worry that USC Notre Dame, which will celebrate its 100th anniversary next year in 2026, at the end of this decade, 2029, 2030, will there be a Notre Dame USC game being played either in October in South Bend or in Los Angeles on Thanksgiving weekend?
Well, I certainly hope so, Matt, because if not, it'd be an affront to so much history and, a rivalry that everybody loves on both sides and pretty universally wants to keep around. I mean, just even the talk that this rivalry would ever go away to me is really ridiculous. I really don't understand it. I mean, I think that, all of the chatter about it's because Notre Dame and Clemson have this new rivalry that they've established, for the next 12 years, like you mentioned, is kind of ridiculous to me. I mean, Notre Dame's an independent, like they have an agreement with the SEC, with the ACC, like you said, where they have to play 5 teams every year anyway. They're, it's not like this is taking up another game in the schedule. So I don't, I just don't, if that ends up being the excuse for why this absolutely historic rivalry is torn apart, I would roll my eyes a million times and just throw my hands in the air because it feels completely ridiculous. I mean, another excuse that I've heard being made from kind of the USC side is Jen Cohn has talked about all the flying across the country and that being an issue, and that factoring into them considering whether or not they keep the Notre Dame rivalry. And again, like, maybe you should have thought about that when you decided to enter the Big Ten and play, teams like Rutgers every year. Like, it's a problem that we've created for ourselves. It's not like, some college football god came out of the sky and said, you have to join the Big Ten now. Like, this is something that we decided ourselves to do, we knew full well that this was also a part of our history, traveling to Notre Dame every year. So again, using that as an excuse, I think that, if this does end up falling apart, I think, there's no genuine excuse that either program can make that justifies this. And I think that really what it's going to come down to is, one program or the other being afraid to play the other one. Because both programs obviously have a lot of, have very positive futures, seemingly. I mean, Notre Dame can expect that more reasonably given their last year. But USC fans are really excited about the direction things are going after the hiring of Chad Bowden and, the 2026 recruiting class, which we've talked about extensively. But, there's a lot of talk in the Modern 12 team playoff about, maybe you don't want to keep some of these historic rivalries so that you can, schedule less, strong opponents so that, your record looks better. And I just think that's ridiculous. I think that, both the USC program and the Notre Dame program should, and I emphasize should because I'm not sure that they will, but they should have too much pride to let that happen. And they should, be they should honor their history. They should be committed to not being afraid of anybody, to it being our best against their best, and, creating more memories for fans on both sides of the rivalry for years and years and years to come. And, college football is about winning national championships, but it's also about so much more than that. It is about these rivalries, and it's about how much every regular season game means. And if this game is thrown away so that we can watch both teams play like a borderline D1 team that, nobody's ever heard of until the week before the game every year, like it's just going to be such a loss for both programs. So I think it's ridiculous that they're even considering it. And I sincerely hope that, neither of these programs continue to make such ridiculous excuses and they just lock in the deal, because neither of them have any reason to let this one fall through.
Now, another item that's kind of attached. I say kind of because it's not like a formal contract, but attached to this Notre Dame Clemson story was reportage that the ACC wants Notre Dame to be playing Florida State and Miami specifically on a more regular basis. But there wasn't a finalized agreement. There are no finalized numbers, no finalized set down exact scheduling format, but it was just the reportage, to the best of my understanding, was simply that Notre Dame is being encouraged to play Florida State and Miami more. Like, the ACC definitely wants that. The significance of that, at least one primary vein of significance, Ethan, is the ACC is trying to survive. The ACC is falling well behind the SEC and the Big Ten. And of course, Florida State and Clemson filed lawsuits against the ACC. That's been a mess. Florida State would, if you asked Florida State, where would you want to be? They'd want to be in the Big Ten. Florida State fans, administrators, trustees, regents, they'd like to be in the Big Ten. They wouldn't mind the SEC, I don't think, but but the main thing is Big Ten or SEC. They want out of the ACC. I don't think this suddenly makes everything hunky dory. We have to ask ourselves, the ACC is making this push, and good on the ACC for, being ambitious, like it has to be. But do you think the ACC can hold up, or do you still think? I don't know what you think. Do you think that we are still looking at a situation where, 4, 5, 6 years down the line, the ACC is going to die, and we're going to have a mega SEC and a mega Big Ten with even more schools than we have now? What's your 5-year window looking like in terms of realignment and where Florida State, Clemson, and Miami are in particular?
I mean, I think that this past year certainly wasn't encouraging for the ACC, especially because, you had some promising teams at the beginning of the year and extending to the year prior. I mean, Florida State obviously had an incredible year before Jordan Travis got hurt, and then they got completely kind of demolished in that bowl game. And then this past year, they had Miami start off, doing decently well. I mean, they were scraping by in some games that they were expected to win by more. Like that Cal game is one in particular that I remember, just because that game was the college game day game of the week, and it had a lot of eyes on it. But I don't know. I think again, it's kind of similar to the USC Notre Dame rivalry. Like I would hope that the ACC can hold up because of the history there, and I think that's kind of a big thing that is lost every time there's these major college football changes is history, and that's part of what makes college football so meaningful. I do think that there is enough there in terms of good coaches and smart people in the ACC, and those programs do mean something, and there's enough programs left that have historical meaning and have enough sort of recent success. But it is going to take a lot of very deliberate moves by those programs and by that conference, I think. And I do think that they should be feeling the pressure, and the conference especially should, needs to be really conscious of the decisions they're making in the next few years or so.
One of the things that just absolutely kills me, Ethan, and everyone watching here at the Voice of College Football, is that when we talk about scheduling, we talk about the plane flights and the rigors and, how exhausting it is and burdensome it is for the schools involved. There are ways to make this easier for everyone, okay? And so with concern to the USC Notre Dame football series, one very, very obvious, easy thing to do to minimize the strain on USC. Let's just talk about this from USC's standpoint, just because we're in an odd year, and an odd year, USC goes to South Bend. So next year we can talk about the Notre Dame perspective on this. But when USC goes to Notre Dame, we all know it's mid-October. That's when that game is played. When it's played in South Bend, it's mid-October. It would just be the easiest, most obvious thing in the world for USC to play a road game at Purdue or Indiana, probably the week before, but either way, just you play Notre Dame and a roadie against Indiana or Purdue in consecutive weeks. What do we have this season? We have USC flying to West Lafayette to play Purdue on September 13, and then USC is going to fly back home, play some home games, and then on October 18th, fly back out to South Bend. Now, that is just indescribably dumb. We have ADs, we have commissioners, we have all these power brokers, and we're making USC fly 2 different times to the same state. And just how monumentally dumb is this? And one thing I've learned in life, I'm almost 50 years old. I'm not afraid to say it. It sucks. I wish I was 15 years earlier. But one thing I've learned in life, it's not really people being stupid. It's not really adults being stupid. It's adults being greedy. They're not actually that dumb. They just want to squeeze as much blood out of the turnip as they possibly can. And there just has to be an adult in the room to say, you know what? We're making lots of television money. The Big Ten is pulling in quite a lot of revenue, around $1 billion last year. Schools got an average payout of $63 million, which is why USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington all went to the Big Ten. But anyway, we're making a lot of money. We can afford to do some sensible things in between the lines, even if it might take away a little bit from television. Okay, we get it. They're playing USC Purdue in September. because it's Purdue. It's not going to get huge television eyeballs. So that's why that game is being played in September. You don't have USC at Purdue later in the season. I get it. I'm a grown up. I can add 2 + 2 and get 4. But at some point, you have to strike a little bit of a balance. If any of these complaints about travel and logistics are to have any weight in the room and are to carry any significance, you need to just have USC fly out to the state of Indiana once, and you have a 2-game road trip. So USC can just set up a base camp for 2 weeks, South Bend and West Lafayette, or in another year, South Bend and Bloomington to play Indiana, the Hoosiers. We have all these complaints, all these problems, and just at some point, it stops being about whether people are smart or dumb. It's just whether people are principled enough, whether people are adult enough to just say, hey, we can make money, we can get TV eyeballs, but let's just act in the interests of athletes, of teams. We can just do the obvious right thing. This is not the right thing. Having USC fly to Purdue in September and then 5 weeks later fly out to South Bend. It just is entirely unnecessary.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, all you have to do is look at the NFL. Plenty of teams in the NFL do exactly what you mentioned, like set up a base camp, play 2 games in the same area, and that's the NFL, right? Those are players that are getting paid a lot more for what they do, and so it would make even more sense for them to have to take some of those more difficult flights. But if the NFL's people can take care of the NFL players in that way, then certainly college administrators can take care of college students who are also going to school, and are also trying to, get their career going off the field, because a lot of these players, they can make NIL money now, but it still follows that they're going to have to get a job after college, because it's not like that money is going to last them forever. And it's also not like, 90% of them are going to make the NFL. So, yeah, I think you gotta, at some point, like I said, you got to stop making the excuses, acknowledge it for what it is, which is, getting greedy or getting soft, and just, embrace the competitive nature, embrace that, it's going to be hard at some points, but some of these difficult games and difficult road trips and hard scheduling conversations build character. And if you want what's best for your program, you're going to have to overcome some of the things like this.
Yeah, I'm a big baseball guy, and by the way, USC baseball is kicking some butt. Looks like USC baseball is going to be in the NCAA tournament for the first time in 10 years. That's pretty awesome. But just in terms of scheduling, earlier this season, the Arizona Diamondbacks, I'm here in Phoenix, Arizona Diamondbacks went to Yankee Stadium to play the Yankees. Then 2-3 weeks later, the Diamondbacks were flying back to New York to play the Mets. It's really the same kind of thing as USC having to fly to Purdue in September and then 5 weeks later, fly to Notre Dame. Come on. Can we just do the obvious right thing? Just so sick of grown adults just looking the other way, because it's not as though they didn't notice. It's just they're willfully looking the other way when this kind of stuff happens. All right, winding down the show, Ethan, just any other things from your journalist's notebook, your USC notebook before we close down the shop? I mean, recruiting, it's hard to add too much to what we've already said and to what we've seen over the past few months under Chad Bowden, and then hiring the new strength coach. By all appearances, appears to be a great hire. Just is there anything else that might have slipped through the cracks that we haven't yet addressed here at USC football?
I think we got to most of it, Matt. I mean, like I said, we have another guy named Coach Carroll here now in Troy, which is, again, it's not Pete Carroll, but it is, Tummaine Carroll. So it's a fun little connection, and it's one that USC fans should be excited about. It's always exciting to have a Coach Carroll here in Troy. And then I mean, recruiting, it just keeps on going. Like every time that I feel like I see a lot of people on Twitter that are like, are we done? Like, we've got 25 players. Like, are we maybe Are we maybe kind of reaching the end here? Are we reaching the point where, we just can't get any more? And then, another recruit comes in, another recruit, and another recruit. So it's exciting. Keeps you on your toes every day. There's always new news. So I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about next week. But I think for this week, we've tackled a lot of the big stuff. And everybody's been a great show. Feel like it's been a great show. Everybody's been active in the chat. We've had a lot of people in here. So appreciate that as always. And exciting times here. It's an exciting time to be a USC football podcaster. So I'm grateful for it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, Ethan. One final note for me. I'm seeing in the chat, USC can't play in November. When I said you don't want to have USC play Purdue in November, it's not about the weather. It's about you don't play a bottom rung team in November. We know that you play the high profile matchups, the biggest rivalries in November, the high profile games. It's not about the weather. That is about high profile. Like USC Wisconsin in November, yes. Why not? Yes. You wouldn't want to have USC play multiple cold weather games in November, but certainly one. So just want to clear that up. When I said you don't want to have USC and Purdue play in November in West Lafayette, not a weather item. That is just you play your bottom rung teams earlier, and you have more of a backloaded schedule. That's generally how most of the power conferences do it. So that just wanted to clear that up before we close down. All right. So every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. in the East, it's USC Trojans Primetime Live with myself, Matt Zemek, and Ethan Inman. Don't forget our Tuesday show as well, Coliseum Chronicles. You want to be watching that and supporting the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. All right, so for Ethan, this is Matt. We are going to see you next week.